used to think my son was building walls with his coding, shutting himself away from the world. I never imagined he was actually building our town's only escape route. But was it enough? My name is Sarah, and for the past 5 years, my world has been defined by the soft, rhythmic clatter of a keyboard from my son Leo's room. To me, it was the sound of a closing door. Lines of cryptic text scrolling across his monitor were the bricks, and his intense focus was the mortar. This was his coding, a world I couldn't enter, and, if I'm being honest, a world I didn't entirely want to. It felt isolating, a silent rebellion against the tight-knit, face-to-face community of Harmony Creek. It wasn't just me. Carol, our next-door neighbor and self-appointed queen of the Harmony Creek PTA, would give me these looks of pity at the grocery store. "Still locked away in that room, is he?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. A boy his age needs fresh air, Sarah, not all that screen time. She and most of our small town saw a problem to be solved, an anti-social tic, a phase he needed to be coaxed out of. I'd nod and offer a weak smile, defending him with vague platitudes about preparing for the future. But I was defending something I didn't understand. I just knew it had been important to his father, and now it was everything to him. I didn't know then that the very fresh air Carol was so concerned about would soon become our biggest threat, or that Harmony Creek's quaint, old-fashioned infrastructure, the very thing we all took pride in, was a house of cards waiting for a breeze. That breeze came sooner than any of us expected. It started as a whisper on the Weather Channel, a storm system churning far out in the ocean, too distant to be a real concern. But the pride of Harmony Creek was also its Achilles heel. We loved our uninterrupted vistas, which meant we'd protested the installation of modern cell towers for years. Our power lines were old, strung above ground between ancient oak trees. We were a postcard, beautiful and fragile. The most vulnerable part of that picture, for me, was my mother. She lived at the Willows, the town's assisted living home, and relied on an electric oxygen concentrator to get through the night. Her life was literally plugged into the town's rickety, outdated grid. The antagonist wasn't a person with a vendetta. It was the wind and the rain. The storm didn't just approach, it lunged at us. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the warnings on the TV escalated from advisory to imminent danger. I remember Carol calling, her voice tight with a panicky sort of glee. "Can you believe this, Sarah? They're saying it's the storm of the century. I've put all my patio furniture in the garage. Have you?" I murmured something non-committal, my eyes fixed on the swaying trees outside. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. It's strange looking back how quickly your entire reality can shift. One minute you're worried about your son's screen time, and the next you're praying the power grid holds so your mother can breathe. If you know that feeling, that sudden lurch when the floor drops out from under you, I'd love to hear about it. And if you're following my story, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It helps to know I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way. Then it happened. A deep, groaning crack echoed through the valley as a massive oak branch fell, and with a final, buzzing sigh, the whole town went dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried my cell. No service. The landline was dead. Every conventional link to the outside world, to my mother, was severed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I ran upstairs to check on Leo, expecting to find him frustrated, his digital world extinguished. But his door was open a crack, and the only light in the entire house was the glow of his laptop screen, powered by some kind of battery backup. The rhythmic clatter of his keyboard was faster now, more urgent. He wasn't playing a game or chatting with friends. He was working, his face illuminated by the screen, a picture of absolute concentration. The sound wasn't one of isolation anymore. In the sudden, oppressive silence of a powerless town, the sound of his coding was the only thing that felt like a heartbeat. I stood there for a moment, frozen in his doorway, a silhouette against the blackness of the house. The wind howled outside, rattling the window frames, but in here, the only sounds were the storm and the steady, frantic tapping of his fingers. "Leo," I said, my voice a strained whisper. He didn't look up, but the pace of his typing slowed for a fraction of a second. "I know," he said, his voice calm, steady. It was the calm that broke me. "You know? Leo, the power is out everywhere. The phones are dead. I can't reach Grandma, her oxygen machine." The words tumbled out, sharp with panic. I took a step into his room, my hand outstretched as if I could physically pull him away from the screen and into my reality of fear. That's when he finally turned to look at me. There was no frustration in his eyes, no annoyance at the interruption. There was just an unnerving focus. "I know, Mom. The whole town's grid is down. The cell towers have no power, and their fiber optic line was probably attached to the same pole that fell." He gestured to a second monitor I hadn't noticed, which displayed a stark black map of Harmony Creek dotted with a few glowing green points. "I'm trying to get a message out." I stared at the screen, my panic giving way to a profound confusion. Get a message out? To who? How? Everything is dead. "Not everything," he said, and turned back to his main screen. Lines of code scrolled past, a language I couldn't read but was beginning to understand. "For 2 years, I've been building a private network. It piggybacks on Wi-Fi signals, lets devices talk directly to each other without the internet. I convinced a few of my friends to install the software. I even got Mr. Henderson at the hardware store to put a note on his roof. I told them it was for a school project." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "They thought we were just building a way to play video games during a power outage." My mind struggled to catch up. The years of me nagging him about fresh air, of Carol's pitying looks, of my own secret worry that his coding was a symptom of something wrong, it all collapsed in on itself. He hadn't been building walls, he had been building a lifeboat. Then came the banging. A frantic, desperate pounding on our front door that was nearly lost in the roar of the wind. "Sarah! Sarah! Are you in there?" It was Carol, her voice shrill with terror. "My basement is flooding. The emergency line is dead. I don't know what to do." The sound of her raw fear acted like a switch, flipping my own panic into something else entirely. I looked from the door, where our neighbor was screaming into the storm, back to my son. He hadn't even flinched. His fingers moved with renewed speed, the clatter of the keys, a tiny, defiant drumbeat against the chaos. On his map screen, a new green dot flickered to life near the center of town, then another. He was finding a path, a digital thread, through a town that had been completely severed from the world. My son, my quiet, withdrawn son, had foreseen this. His obsession, his isolating hobby, the very thing I had resented for years, was now the only thing that stood between our small town and total collapse. The floor had dropped out from under me earlier that night. Now, I realized we were all in free fall, and my son was the only one who had thought to build a parachute. I threw the deadbolt and wrenched the door open. Carol practically fell inside, a whirlwind of wet leaves and frantic energy. "My sump pump. It's electric, Sarah. The water is coming up through the floorboards. My grandfather's old photos are down there," she sobbed, clutching my arm. Her face was pale, streaked with rain and mascara. All I could offer was a towel and a useless hollow platitude. "We'll figure something out," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. My mind wasn't in her basement. It was miles away, in a quiet room at the Willows, counting the minutes of battery life on a machine that was keeping my mother alive. Carol's hysteria was a catalyst. I couldn't just stand here trapped between my neighbor's immediate crisis and my son's abstract, digital one. I had to do something tangible. There were rules for this kind of thing, procedures. You don't rely on a teenager's school project. You go to the authorities. "I'm going to the police station," I announced, pulling on my heavy rain boots. "They'll have a command center, a plan." Carol looked at me as if I'd just suggested we go for a swim. "You can't go out in this." But I had to. It was the only logical step. I grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the storm, leaving Carol sputtering in my entryway. The world outside was a nightmare of sound and fury. Wind tore at me, and rain fell in blinding sheets. Tree limbs littered the road like broken bones. Every step was a gamble against a twisted ankle, or worse. The 10-minute walk to the center of town felt like a treacherous expedition. When I finally saw the dim, flickering lights of the town hall, which also housed our small police department, a wave of relief washed over me. This was civilization. This was order. The scene inside shattered that illusion. A single, sputtering generator powered a few bare bulbs, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and fear. A handful of officers were huddled around a desk, shouting over the noise of the storm, and the panicked citizens crowded into the lobby. Officer Miller, a man I'd known since he was a teenager bagging groceries, was trying to write on a notepad with a wet pen, his face a mask of exhaustion. I pushed my way through the crowd. "Miller!" I yelled over the din. "It's Sarah Jensen. My mother is at the Willows. She's on an oxygen concentrator. I need to know if they have power. I need to get a message to them." He looked up, his eyes barely registering me. "Sarah, I can't help you with that right now," he said, his voice flat and frayed. "We've got a fire on Elm Street. Half of Miller's Ravine is flooded, and the bridge is threatening to wash out. We have no contact with the Willows. Their phone lines are down, same as everyone else's." "But they have emergency protocols, right? A backup system?" I pleaded, my voice rising with desperation. "They're supposed to have a generator," he said, turning his attention to a man babbling about his roof caving in. "Look, I'm sure they're fine. We have to prioritize." Prioritize. The word hit me like a physical blow. My mother's ability to breathe wasn't a priority. The system I had blindly trusted, the formal chain of command that was supposed to protect us, was utterly broken. They weren't in control. They were just triaging a catastrophe with a notepad and a failing generator. The frustration was a hot, metallic taste in my mouth. I had risked the storm to appeal to a system that had already collapsed, while my son, my quiet, withdrawn Leo, was in his room actually building a new one. I backed away from the desk, the shouts of the desperate and the weary replies of the officers fading into a meaningless roar. I felt a terrifying, hollow dread. We were completely and utterly on our own. I turned and walked back out into the gale, but this time, the wind and rain didn't feel like the enemy. They were just a fact. The real failure was the flimsy, fair-weather structure of our town's safety net, and I had wasted precious time putting my faith in it. As I staggered back up my own street, I saw it. My house, a black shape against the churning sky, with one solitary, defiant square of light. Leo's window. The sound of his coding, I now realized, wasn't just a heartbeat. It was a broadcast. It was the only emergency service that was still operational. I burst back through the door, slamming it against the gale. Carol jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Sarah, you're soaked! Was anyone there? Did they help?" I shook my head, stripping off my wet jacket and letting it fall in a puddle on the floor. The hollow feeling from the police station had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "No," I said, my voice flat. "They can't. They're overwhelmed. We're on our own." Her face crumpled. "On our own? But what about my basement? What about? Everything?" I didn't answer. I walked past her, my boots squelching on the floor, and went straight up the stairs. My destination was the glowing rectangle of Leo's doorway. I pushed it open. He was still there, a silhouette against the cascading lines of text. The air in his room was electric with focus. The map of Harmony Creek was still on his secondary monitor, but now it had more green dots, a fragile constellation of connectivity. A few were linked by faint, pulsing lines. "Any luck?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "Maybe," he said, not looking away. "I have a solid link to the Henderson hardware store. Mr. Henderson's node is strong, but I can't get a signal past it toward the Willows. Something's blocking the path." He pointed a finger at the screen. "There's a dead zone right here." Before I could ask what that meant, the house gave a violent, sickening shudder. A deafening crack exploded from directly above us, a sound so loud and visceral it felt like the sky was being ripped in two. It was followed by a splintering groan of tortured wood and a heavy final thud that shook the floorboards. Plaster dust rained down from the ceiling. Then a new sound. A slow, rhythmic drip, 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 right next to Leo's desk. Carol screamed from the bottom of the stairs. "What was that?" I looked up. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the ceiling. The drips were landing perilously close to a tangle of wires and one of Leo's external hard drives. A tree. A tree had fallen on our house. The storm wasn't just outside anymore, it was in. Carol came scrambling up the stairs, her eyes wide with terror. She saw the spreading stain, the dripping water. "The roof is gone. Sarah, we have to get out. We have to go." She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me out of the room. "No," I said, planting my feet. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Are you insane? The ceiling is going to collapse. We have to leave." Her eyes darted to Leo, who, impossibly, was still typing, his pace even faster now, as if the impact had been a starting gun. "What is he doing? Get him off that thing. We need to get to the school, the emergency shelter." That's when I snapped. I whirled around, pulling my arm from her grasp. "The emergency shelter is a gym full of scared people with no power and no information, just like the police station," I hissed, my voice low and fierce. "Going out there is giving up. This," I jabbed a finger toward Leo, "is our only chance." "A chance at what?" Carol sobbed. "Getting crushed?" "He's playing a game while we're about to die." "It's not a game," the words erupted out of me, filled with all the frustration and shame of the last 5 years. "This is his coding. It's the only thing in this whole damn town that is still working. He is building a lifeline, Carol, while the rest of us were bragging about our quaint, useless infrastructure. My mother is dying, and the only hope she has is in this room, on that screen, so we are not going anywhere." I turned my back on her, my body forming a protective wall in the doorway. I looked at the water dripping, at the buckling ceiling, and then at my son, his face impassive, his fingers flying. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a terrifying, absolute clarity. The authorities couldn't help. The neighbors couldn't help. The only thing in the world that mattered was keeping that water away from his computer. The battle for Harmony Creek wasn't at the police station or the fire hall. It was here, in this leaking, damaged bedroom. My words hung in the air, sharp and final. Carol stared at me, her mouth agape, her panic momentarily eclipsed by sheer disbelief. The dripping from the ceiling seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence, a relentless metronome counting down the seconds we had left. The house groaned again, a deep, skeletal complaint. I didn't wait for her to argue. I turned and moved with a purpose I hadn't felt all night. "I need a bucket," I said, my voice tight and low, the big plastic tub from the hall closet. "A bucket?" Carol's voice was a thin, reedy whisper. "Sarah, you heard that sound. We need to go." I ignored her. My hands, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the closet door before I managed to pull out the large gray storage bin we used for old winter clothes. It was heavy, awkward, but felt as solid and real as a shield. I hauled it back into Leo's room. The water was coming faster now, a steady trickle splashing onto the floorboards. With a delicacy that felt absurd given the chaos, I knelt down. My hands trembled as I carefully gathered the nest of cables in the small black box of the external hard drive, moving them just out of the widening puddle's reach. I slid the plastic tub into place. The first drops hit the bottom with a hollow thump, 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 a new sound in our symphony of disaster. Having done the one practical thing I could, I stood up and looked at my son. He hadn't moved. The screaming match, the frantic rush for a bucket, it had all happened in a universe he wasn't part of. His world was the glowing screen, the pulsing green dots, the problem. "The dead zone?" he said, his voice a low murmur, almost to himself. "It's the old municipal water tower on Chestnut Hill. It's a massive Faraday cage. The signal can't penetrate it or get around it. It's a straight line from Henderson's to the Willows, and the tower is right in the way. My stomach plummeted. All this, the defiance, the risk, my ferocious defense of him. And it was for nothing. A physical obstacle he couldn't code his way around. "So it's impossible?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. "You can't reach them?" For the first time, a flicker of something, frustration, maybe doubt, crossed his face. His typing slowed. He zoomed in on the map, dragging the view past the impenetrable dead zone around the water tower, and then he stopped. The clatter of his keys went silent. The only sounds were the storm, the dripping water, and my own ragged breathing. "Wait," he breathed. A new green dot had just appeared on the map. It was faint, flickering, on the far side of the water tower, miles from any other node. "Someone else is online," he said, his voice electric with a new energy. "Their device just connected. They must have their own backup power." I leaned in, my eyes locked on that tiny, hopeful spark. "Who is it? Where?" "I don't know who," he said, his fingers already a blur on the keys. "The node is near the old quarry. It's way out of the way, but it's on the other side of the tower." He looked at me then, his eyes wide and bright, with a terrifying, brilliant idea. "I can't go through the dead zone, but maybe I can go over it." He wasn't just connecting dots anymore, he was building something new, something on the fly. "I can try to bounce the signal from Henderson's to this new node, and then back down to the Willows. I can triangulate. It's a long shot, the signal will be weak." His voice trailed off as he dove back into the work, his fingers flying faster than I had ever seen them move. Lines of his coding scrolled up the screen, a frantic, beautiful, and utterly incomprehensible spell. I stood beside him, a guard with a plastic bucket, watching him try to build a bridge through the sky. The seconds stretched into a minute, then two. The only sounds were the groaning house, the drumming rain, the steady thump of water into the plastic tub, and the furious, non-stop clatter of Leo's keyboard. Carol stood frozen by the door, her earlier hysteria replaced by a stunned, watchful silence. I felt like I was holding my breath. My entire universe shrunk down to the fate of a few packets of data flying through a storm. "It's not working," Leo said, and the words landed like stones in the waterlogged quiet. The typing stopped. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight. "The signal is too weak?" "No," he said, shaking his head. He pointed to a scrolling window of text on his main monitor, a stream of red error messages. "The signal is strong. It's being corrupted. The packets are arriving, but they're garbage. It's not random noise from the storm either. It's patterned, deliberate." He looked up at me, and the exhaustion in his eyes was suddenly replaced by a sharp, analytical glint I'd only ever seen his father have. "Someone is attacking the network. It's a denial of service attack. They're flooding the nodes with junk data, so nothing real can get through." The floor seemed to drop out from under me for the second time that night. It wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just a broken grid or a fallen tree. Someone, right now, was actively working to keep us dark, to keep us silent. Who? Why would anyone do that? "I don't know," he said, his fingers already moving again, but with a different rhythm, not building, but dissecting. "The main attack is coming from the quarry node, spoofing its identity. But my coding, the protocols Dad taught me, they have a digital watermark. I can trace the command signal." His eyes narrowed. "The commands aren't just coming from the quarry. There's another signal, a smaller one, reinforcing the attack. It's close. Very close." He went still. He stared at his screen, his face pale in its glow. "It's in the house." The air went cold. The dripping water, the howling wind, it all faded into a dull roar. There were only 3 people in this house. Me, Leo, and Carol. I slowly turned my head, my neck stiff, and looked at the woman huddled in the doorway. Carol, the queen of the PTA. the concerned neighbor. Her face was a mask of terror, but her eyes weren't on the leaking ceiling anymore. They were locked on Leo's screen, wide with a horror that was not born of the storm. In her white-knuckled hand, she was clutching her phone, its screen dark. "Carol," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what is on your phone?" Her panic shattered, but not into sobs. It hardened, sharpened into something brittle and ugly. "He wasn't supposed to be able to do this," she spat, her voice a venomous hiss. "Your weirdo son and his stupid games. He was supposed to be as blind as the rest of us." The confession came tumbling out, a torrent of resentment as foul as her flooded basement. It wasn't just her. It was a small group, old families, people on the town council. They'd fought the cell towers, the fiber optic lines, not just out of pride, but out of a calculated, vicious fear of change. They saw Harmony Creek being diluted, their control slipping away. This storm was their opportunity. A perfectly isolated town, a federal disaster declaration, and a pot of reconstruction money they could steer, ensuring the town was rebuilt exactly as it was, a fortress against the future. The quarry node wasn't some random person. It was their hub, set up to jam any emergency frequencies. They never counted on a private network. They never counted on Leo's coding. Your job was to watch him, I realized, the pieces clicking into place with sickening finality. All those years of syrupy concern, the questions about his screen time. It was surveillance. You were supposed to make sure he couldn't be a problem. "He's a freak," she shrieked, taking a step back. This town was perfect. I didn't waste another word on her. I lunged, my hand closing around her wrist. She yelped, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage so pure and cold it burned. I ripped the phone from her grasp. Her face contorted, and for a second I thought she would fight, but the look in my eyes must have stopped her. I turned and thrust the phone at Leo. "Can you stop it?" He didn't even look at it. "I don't need to," he said, his fingers a blur. The attack wasn't just a brute force flood. It had a structure, a logic he could understand, and a logic he could break. Her phone was just a repeater. Now that I have the master signature from her device, I can write a filter. I can tell our network to reject anything with that watermark. The red error messages on his screen vanished. The frantic, incomprehensible river of his coding flowed, redirecting, rebuilding, fighting back. I stood over him, my body a shield, my hand still clutching the useless plastic bucket. I watched as he rerouted the signal, his custom protocols slicing through the enemy's junk data like a scalpel. He punched in a final string of commands and hit enter. On the map, the faint line from Henderson's hardware arced up, bounced off the now friendly quarry node, and shot down toward the dot labeled The Willows. A tiny confirmation packet, a digital handshake appeared, a flicker of green light. He slumped back in his chair, his hands falling from the keyboard. The rhythmic clatter was gone. In the sudden silence, he looked up at me, his face exhausted but clear. "Message sent," he said, his voice quiet. "They have it. They know help is needed." The silence that followed his words was more profound than the storm. The clatter of the keyboard had been the engine of our survival, and without it, the house felt dead again, save for the dripping water and the wind's mournful howl. My knuckles were white where I gripped Carol's phone. I looked from my son slumped in his chair to the woman in the doorway. Carol's face was a ruin, the ugly truth of her actions laid bare. She was no longer a nosy neighbor. She was a saboteur, a jailer. The adrenaline that had fueled my rage and my resolve began to recede, leaving a deep, trembling exhaustion in its wake. My legs felt unsteady. I had to brace myself against Leo's desk, the cool metal of his monitor stand a grounding point in the spinning chaos of the last hour. My son. My quiet, withdrawn boy. He hadn't just built a lifeboat. He had navigated it through a sea of sharks he never knew were there, using a language I had dismissed as noise. Shame and a fierce, gut-wrenching pride warred within me. They'll send someone from the county, I said, my voice raspy. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of faith in him. Leo nodded, not looking up from his screen. The message included the generator status and Grandma's medical needs. It's a standard emergency data packet. They'll get it. My eyes drifted back to Carol. She flinched as I met her gaze. The whole town was a hostage, and she had been one of the guards. The system I had run to for help, Officer Miller and his wet notepad, wasn't just overwhelmed. It was compromised from within. It's not enough, I said, my voice hardening again. The exhaustion would have to wait. Just getting a message to the Willows isn't enough. These people, your friends on the council, they tried to kill people. They left us all to die. I held up her phone. This is evidence. Leo looked at the phone, then back at his screen. It's more than that, he said. He pointed to a log file he had pulled up. The attack from her phone has a unique signature. My software logged every packet. I know exactly who was connected to their secret network and when. I have the logs from the quarry node too. The proof isn't just on her phone. It's right here. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The local network is still a mess, but the path I opened to get the message out, it goes beyond Harmony Creek. It's hitting a state emergency services relay tower. A new kind of hope, cold and sharp, cut through me. We didn't have to rely on the broken system inside our town. We could go over its head. Can you talk to them? I asked. Can you send them all of this? A slow smile touched Leo's lips. It was the first real smile I'd seen on his face all night. I can do better, he said. I can open a direct, secure voice channel. He typed a few more commands. A small window popped up on his screen. Backquote greater than opening VoIP channel to NCDPS. Backquote A. Moment later, a flat, tinny voice filled the small room. This is North Carolina State Emergency Response, Operator 319. To whom am I speaking? This is an unsanctioned channel. I took a deep breath, stood up straight, and took the headset Leo offered me. I was no longer just a panicked mother. I was a witness. My name is Sarah Jensen, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the static. I'm a resident of Harmony Creek. Our town is cut off. Power grid is down, communications are out. But that's not the whole story. Ma'am, we're aware of the storm, the operator said, his tone impatient. We're trying to route resources, but all local channels are unresponsive. They're unresponsive because they are being deliberately jammed, I said, locking eyes with Carol, who seemed to shrink under my gaze. I have evidence of a conspiracy by members of our town council to isolate us, to block emergency communications. My son has digital proof. Logs, network signatures, everything. They set up their own network to launch a denial of service attack against the only functioning communication system in this valley. I paused, letting the weight of it land. The system my son built with his coding. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Your son built a network? The operator asked, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. Yes, I said, and he is forwarding the data packet to you right now. It contains the attack logs and the device signature of one of the conspirators. I held up the phone. She's right here. Her name is Carol Peterson. Carol let out a choked sob. The operator's voice was all business now. Ma'am, stay on the line. I'm routing this to my supervisor and dispatching state police. Do not engage with the suspect. Can you confirm your location? I gave him our address. I watched as Leo's program uploaded the file, a small progress bar filling up with green. It was a digital cry for help, but it was also an indictment. It was the payoff for 5 years of solitude, for every pitying look and worried conversation. It was my son's coding, making the system finally truly work. The battle for Harmony Creek was over. The cavalry was coming, and they weren't just bringing blankets and water. They were bringing justice. The state police came in high-clearance vehicles that churned the muddy roads into a deeper ruin. They took Carol away in a car that wasn't even hers. She didn't look at me as they led her out, her face a pale, slack mask. The reconstruction crews arrived a week later, their nail guns a percussive, healing beat against the lingering silence. They patched the hole in our roof, replaced the ruined drywall in Leo's ceiling, and left behind the clean, sterile smell of spackle and new paint. On the surface, things were returning to normal. Harmony Creek was being plugged back in, one house at a time. But I don't sleep through the night anymore. A gust of wind rattling the window pane is enough to send a jolt of ice through my veins. The sound of heavy rain on the new roof makes my heart hammer against my ribs. I wake up from dreams where the water isn't just dripping into a bucket, but pouring from the ceiling in a solid sheet, and I can't get to Leo's room because the hallway is flooded with dark, swirling water filled with faces I recognize. Neighbors, parents from the PTA, smiling with Carol's syrupy concern. The deepest change, however, is the silence from Leo's room. For weeks after the storm, there was none of the familiar clatter. The engine of our survival had been shut down. His door, which had been open for that one terrifying night, was now perpetually closed. The silence was worse than the sound had ever been. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I'd walk past his door and hold my breath, listening for a sign of life, a sign of the boy I knew. A few nights ago, I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping, but it didn't sound like a heartbeat anymore. It felt like a nervous tick, a restless ghost in the machine. I pushed his door open without knocking. He was there, silhouetted against the glow of his monitors, but he wasn't building. He was watching. On the screen was a complex web of connections, our town's fragile new network, with streams of data flowing back and forth. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He didn't look up. "Monitoring," he said. His voice was flat. "The state police took my logs, but they asked me to keep an eye on things. They don't have anyone who understands the architecture of what I built." I looked at the screen, at the endless scroll of log files. It looked just like the code I had never understood, but now it felt different, tainted. "Is that fun?" I asked, the word tasting stupid and hollow as soon as I said it. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were old. The focused calm of that night was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted vigilance. "It's not a game anymore, Mom," he said. "It's not fun." He gestured to a window showing network traffic. "Every time someone logs on, I see it. I see the packets. I have to check them, make sure they're not malicious. That one," he pointed, "is from the Henderson's grandson. He's just playing a game. But that one, that's a probe. Someone is testing the firewalls." The pride I felt in him was still there, a fierce, burning thing, but it was now tangled with a new, sickening fear. His coding, his private world, had been turned into a battlefield. The thing that had been his refuge was now his prison. He hadn't just built a network, he had inherited its defense. The town he saved now saw him as a kind of digital wizard, a boy genius hero. But I saw the cost. The joy had been surgically removed from his passion, replaced with the grim responsibility of a watchman on a wall he never asked to guard. He had connected our town, but in the process his own world had become smaller and colder than ever before. I walked past Leo's room, the door closed, the silence a heavy weight. It had been 3 weeks. The state investigators had come and gone, taking statements and copies of Leo's logs. Carol and 3 members of the town council were facing a raft of federal charges. Harmony Creek was quietly, grimly trying to pretend it had only been the victim of a storm, not of its own proud, backward-looking heart. But I couldn't pretend. I saw the cost every time I looked at my son's haunted eyes. I put on my jacket, my hands moving with a cool resolve. I wasn't running into the rain this time. The sun was bright, the air was clean, but my destination was the same, the town hall. When I walked in, the frantic, panicked energy was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of bureaucracy trying to reassert itself. Officer Miller was at the same desk, but he was hunched over a pile of insurance forms, not a wet notepad. He looked up as I approached, his face haggard. He'd aged a decade and a month. "Sarah," he said, managing a tired smile, "good to see you out. I heard about your mother. Glad she's okay." "She's okay because of my son," I said, my voice even. I didn't sit in the chair he gestured to. I stood. No thanks to the system, I came here begging for help from that night. His smile faltered. He looked down at his papers. We were overwhelmed, Sarah. You saw what it was like. I saw a man telling me my mother's life wasn't a priority, I said, my voice dropping lower. You told me to have faith in your protocols, in the town's generators, but you didn't know the truth, did you, Miller? You didn't know your priorities were being set by people who were actively trying to cut us off from the world. You were just a cog in a machine that was designed to fail. He flinched, his face flushing with a mixture of shame and anger. That's not fair. I didn't know what Carol and the others were doing. No, you didn't, I agreed, and the softness in my tone made him look up. You just trusted the way things had always been. You trusted the people you played golf with. You trusted the postcard picture of Harmony Creek. You all did, and it almost got us all killed. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. My son is 16 years old. For the last 3 weeks, he's been the unpaid, unofficial head of this town's entire emergency communications infrastructure. The state police are asking a child to monitor network traffic for security threats because no one else here knows how. His coding, the thing everyone in this town pitied him for, is the only reason you're filling out insurance forms instead of death certificates, and it is breaking him. The truth of it hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. What do you want me to do, Sarah? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I want you to stop being overwhelmed and start being useful, I said, straightening up. I want a special town meeting. I want a line item in the new budget for network infrastructure. I want the town to formally contract my son, not as a hero, not as a volunteer, but as a paid consultant to maintain and upgrade the system he built. And I want a plan to train 2 other people as his backups so he's not a single point of failure, so he can be a kid again. I watched him, this man who was supposed to represent order. I had come to him for help, and he had offered me platitudes. Now I was offering him a lifeline, a way to build a system that actually worked. He stared at me for a long time, the implications of my demands settling over him. He wasn't just being asked to approve a budget. He was being forced to admit that the old Harmony Creek was dead and that its savior was a quiet boy in a dark room. His coding, he said, shaking his head slowly. All this time. Yes, I said, all this time. He was preparing for the future you all were trying so hard to prevent. The future is here, Miller. You can either be a part of it, or you can become another relic in a flooded basement. He picked up a pen, then set it down. He looked past me, out the window at the town slowly coming back to life. Finally, he met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw the weary public servant give way to the man who realized he'd been saved. Okay, Sarah, he said, his voice raspy with defeat and something that sounded almost like hope. I'll schedule the meeting. The town meeting was as ugly as I expected, and just as necessary. I stood in the back and listened as Miller, true to his word, laid out the proposal. He was shouted down by a few angry voices. People who still saw Carol as a martyr for the old ways. People who couldn't stand the idea of being indebted to a teenager. But for every shout, there were 5 quiet, determined nods from people who had spent a night listening for a rescue that never came. The budget passed. 2 months later, I'm sitting on my porch, a place I avoided for weeks, and I can listen to the wind in the trees without my stomach clenching. I have a new routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 high school seniors, Maria and Ben, come to the house. They sit in Leo's room for 2 hours, learning the architecture of his network. They are his paid interns, and he is their paid mentor, the town's first official Director of Network Resilience. The title makes him laugh, but the paycheck and the shared responsibility have done more for him than any therapy session could. I still have nightmares some nights. I see water rising and hear Carol's venomous hiss, but when I wake up, the house is quiet and solid around me. The healing is a slow, unglamorous process, like new grass pushing up through scorched earth. I hear it now, from the open window of his room. The clatter of the keyboard. It's not the frantic, desperate sound from the storm, nor the haunted, restless tapping from the weeks after. It's something else. It's light, intermittent, and exploratory. It sounds like a conversation. I walk up the stairs and find his door ajar. I knock softly on the frame. His room is clean. The grim survivalist bunker has been dismantled. The second monitor that once showed the map of our town's terror now cycles through pictures of distant galaxies. He's reclaimed the space. He swivels in his chair and gives me a small, genuine smile. Hey, yourself, I say, leaning against the doorframe. I thought Ben was on monitoring duty tonight. He is. The network is fine. This is something else. I step inside, my old apprehension replaced by a quiet curiosity. On his main screen, there aren't endless lines of text, but a black background where delicate, branching structures of light are slowly growing, like frost on a window pane. They pulse with soft colors, expanding and connecting in intricate patterns. What am I looking at? I ask. It's a visualization, he says, a spark of the old, focused passion in his eyes. I'm feeding it the town's power usage data from the last month. Each branch is a neighborhood. Each little light is a house. The colors show the ebb and flow of electricity. It's the town's heartbeat, I guess. I stare at the screen, mesmerized. I can't read the language that builds this, but I can read the art it creates. I can see the pulse of life. All those years, I had seen his coding as a wall of incomprehensible text. I finally understand it's a canvas. He wasn't just building a network to transmit data. He was finding a way to translate the world into a language he loved. It's beautiful, Leo, I say, and the words are true and full, with no room for the old shame or fear. He turns back to the screen, his fingers moving over the keys. A new branch of light blooms in a corner of the screen, a soft, steady blue. I was thinking of adding the weather data, he muses. See how the pattern changes when it rains. I put my hand on his shoulder, and he doesn't stiffen. We stand there for a moment, mother and son, watching the quiet digital life of our town breathe on a screen. The sound of his coding fills the room, but it's no longer a sound of isolation or a frantic call for help. It's just the sound of my son, home again, building something not because he has to, but because he wants to. A year has passed. The new cell tower, the one they finally approved without a fight, blinks a steady red light on the ridge at night. Most of our power lines are buried now, safe from the wind. Harmony Creek is stronger, quieter. The postcard is being carefully pieced back together, but with a different kind of glue. The scars are still there if you know where to look. They're in the new roof on our house, the empty seats at town meetings, and in the way my breath still catches when the sky turns a bruised shade of purple. The biggest change for me is the sound from Leo's room. For a long time after the interns started, it was the sound of teaching, measured, patient, full of stops and starts. But lately, it's changed again. It's a sound I've never heard before. It's not the wall of my ignorance or the frantic drumbeat of our survival. It's something quieter, more fluid. It sounds like thought itself. I follow it up the stairs tonight, a cup of tea in my hand for him. His door is open. The room is bathed in the soft, shifting light of his monitor, the colors reflecting in his glasses. He isn't hunched over with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's leaning back, watching the screen with an artist's contemplative gaze. The map of our town is gone. In its place is a swirling, three-dimensional nebula of light and shadow. Is that a screensaver? I ask, my voice soft. He turns and smiles. It's a real smile, one that reaches his eyes. Sort of. It's a program I wrote. I step closer, drawn in by the slow, mesmerizing dance on the screen. It looks organic, alive. What does it do? It listens, he says. He points to a small microphone on his desk. It's listening to the ambient sounds of the house, the furnace kicking on, the refrigerator hum, the wind outside. He gestures back to the screen. Each sound has a different signature. The program translates them into these shapes and colors. It's a way to see the house breathe. I watch as a gust of wind rattles the window, and a ripple of cool blue light pulses through the nebula on the screen. It's the sound that once filled me with dread, transformed into something beautiful and serene. The fear I had, the resentment, the utter confusion, it all feels like a lifetime ago. I had been so afraid of the language he spoke, never realizing he was just trying to write poetry. His coding wasn't a wall to keep me out. It was a window, and he was just waiting for me to be willing to look through it. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I say, and I mean it. He looks from the screen to me, and in his eyes I see not a watchman or a soldier, but my son, the quiet boy who found his voice in the hum of a machine. "Thanks, Mom," he says, and turns back to his work, his fingers drifting to the keyboard to make a small adjustment. A new constellation of soft, warm light blooms in the center of the screen, a perfect translation of the quiet moment between us. I leave him there, watching the house breathe, listening to the gentle clatter of the keys. The sound is a comfort now, a promise, a reminder that the most complex, esoteric passions can be a source of strength, a way to connect, a way to build a better world out of a broken one. He didn't just save our town, he showed me how to see it, how to hear it, in a language I'm finally beginning to understand. It took a storm to tear down the walls between us, but what we've built in its place is so much stronger. If this story has helped you look at something in your own life a little differently, or maybe understand someone you love a little better, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It's good to know we're all finding new ways to connect,